But yes, without further ado, it's a delight to welcome you to today's webinar. In this webinar, we're going to be looking at how you can elevate your digital personal brand as an executive leader and how to amplify your leadership voice through online platforms. And in terms of the agenda, we're going to be looking at why we're here, why it matters, the challenges, where to be and where not to be, finding your digital voice, case studies, tips to take away, and then at the end we'll have time for questions. Though if you have any questions throughout, please do feel free to ask. It's one of those subjects where I think each of these elements, there's a lot of extra detail we could go into if you would like. And also in terms of questions, this is definitely a space of no judgment. So if there's anything you've always wanted to ask but been afraid to, now is most certainly the time. So yeah, very briefly, a wee bit about myself. I am Michael. You can see me on the right-hand side and also in the video box right now. I've previously worked in senior digital and communications roles, including as global digital editorial manager for Red Bull, as a director for social media strategy and communications at Brunswick. I've also worked at the likes of the BBC, Barclaycard, STV, The Herald. I've also had charity sector experience. I founded COVID Aid, which existed during the pandemic to provide support for people affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. I've also been an interim CEO, been a trustee, had senior roles, which I think helps in terms of seeing things from both sides of the fence. I've also studied executive leadership, digital strategy. My background, I initially studied journalism and philosophy. And earlier this year, I'm very glad to say that we launched FOR, which is a new strategic communications collective. We're based in Scotland, but available wherever you are. I'll keep it quite brief, but basically in a turbulent and unpredictable landscape, we're looking to help you find your voice, applying ingenious thinking to find and engage key audiences with the right message. So we do strategic communications, digital market campaigns, executive consultancy, PR, social media, and much more. So please do get in touch if you're interested to find out more details. And in terms of why we're here today, I think it very much is the digital age of leadership. The intersection of leadership and digital communications has never been more critical. I think we're all aware that more and more of our own lives, including work, are being spent online. Also, that the digital landscape is more complex than ever for today's executive and leaders. However, it is increasingly where we are expected to be, sometimes whether we like it or not. Um, and I think this is a very important kind of thing to mention is that much of professional and personal success depends on persuading others to recognize your value. Whether that's applying for jobs, asking for promotions, vying for leadership positions, writing your dating profile for that, and maybe substitute LinkedIn in this case. But for better or worse, in today's world, everyone is a brand, and you need to develop yours and get comfortable marketing it. And I can say from personal experience, it's something I wasn't as comfortable with in the beginning and have learned along the way of what works for myself. And I think you can too. So what is personal branding? To state it very concisely and simply, it's the intentional strategic practice in which you define and express your own value proposition. And for employers, for companies, organizations, it's more important than ever. So this quote comes from the Connected Leadership report by my former employees, Brunswick, who had surveyed thousands of readers of financial publications, employees of companies, about their communications expectations of corporate leaders. And their research showed very clearly that stakeholders expect executives to use social media to lead. As the report says, it's never been more important to get it right. Leaders who understand the importance of communicating online build authentic, trusted platforms that advance business objectives and lead to tangible, real-world outcomes. And just to emphasize the point, some more stats, which really do show that employees, financial leaders, all think that it's important for executives, for CEOs to be communicating about the company on social media, to know how to use it, and be fluent. if you're in a senior role, then employees and key stakeholders will expect to hear from you. And in terms of why your personal brand matters, then I think there's the egotistical reason that Jeff Bezos points to on the right-hand side. Branding is what people say about you when you're not in a room, and you'd always like to imagine that's positive rather than negative. But your personal brand professionally has multiple benefits. First off, for your organization, as we are just referencing there, I think importantly for our day-to-day lives, reputation amongst colleagues who are also going to be on some of these channels who will see what you're doing digitally. Reputation amongst peers, which can be very important in terms of if you're parts of certain groups, networks, going to conferences, that can all play a part. And I think that all factors into your own career progression. So undoubtedly, hiring managers, your potential future bosses will research your online presence for any senior roles, certainly before they then hire you, looking for the positives, but often also looking for any potential red flags. In terms of career progression, it also creates new opportunities by being visible, being present, and building your network. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it can be a bit fearful to get into this. And we also face the same sort of anxieties when promoting ourselves online, especially when we're getting started. This can include risk of exposure. What will people think of me? It's hard, especially when you don't know how people are necessarily reading, looking at something. It can feel risky. What if you say the wrong thing? But for these reasons, it is an opportunity because those concerns often scare off peers and other people from having an active presence. And that creates a space for you if you're able to do so with care and consideration to avoid those potential pitfalls. And there's also some practical challenges. These can include putting the time in amongst a busy schedule, work personal separation. How can you be yourself privately and still authentically professionally? And also what I've dubbed the boringness balancing act, which is the right mix of personal touch and professional polish, and trying not to remove your personality too much. Um, we'll speak about all these elements throughout the presentation. I would say in terms of time, just right now, I do find it's useful to schedule time into your daily calendar. My recommendation is 15 to 30 minutes into a daily calendar. Try to do so at the start of the day while you're still fresh and not too jaded. And I think that can be useful just for ensuring that other priorities don't then take precedent. So, where to be, and perhaps as importantly, if not more so, where not to be. This subject, as the others, there's so much more that we could say about this, but hopefully this will provide some good guiders and pointers at this time. So yeah, just note social network fragmentation is real. It's become harder and harder to know where to be. And there's an overwhelming amount of platforms with ones spring up what seems like every week. But I think for this, we can keep it relatively simple. And I think for executives and for a personal brand in the professional sphere, then right now, the choice I would recommend being on first and foremost is LinkedIn. It's the most solid bet for pros. There's almost 40 million users in the UK alone, hundreds of millions globally. It's become very much known for thought leadership and industry networking, finding jobs. Though it has evolved in surprising ways. Even last week, it's now launched games on the platform, which I'm not too sure if that's the right way in which to evolve, but they are experimenting with different formats, different approaches for keeping people on the platform. I think because it's owned by Microsoft, then it means that there's a solidity to it. And I think that, yeah, it's the platform to be on for leaders at the moment. If you go on to there, you can see some of the biggest business leaders, such as Bill Gates, Satya Nadella, political leaders, anybody who wants to be thought of in leadership role is generally on LinkedIn in some sort of capacity. X, formerly known as Twitter, I've dubbed as the imploding network just because it's very much in a state of flux. It looks like it's declining, but as important as definitely at least a secondary consideration because it has been the place to engage with real-time conversations and trends. There have been lively communities, including around business. Any sort of niche subject really has had some sort of community there. Um, the ownership changes have brought uncertainty and driven away users, encouraging competitors. But you'll still find that a lot of the biggest business leaders are on there, use that for announcements. I saw earlier this week that Tim Cook of Apple used the platform for promoting the launch of the new iPads. So it's definitely still has a value. But if we're thinking about being potentially ahead of the curve, then I think whether we want to spend time in there, given that it does seem to be in comply and decline, as opposed to somewhere like Meta's Threads. So Threads is a Twitter competitor, which now has more users in the US on a monthly basis than Twitter does. Still growing in the UK, but because it's owned by the same owners, Mark Zuckerberg, as Facebook and Instagram, there's maybe a bit more solidity to it as well than Twitter X has at the moment. So it's worth weighing that up. And then we have what I've called the fun networks, Instagram and TikTok. Called those because they have more of a say positive for the most part, focus on images, videos being concise, having a hook. And as a leader, I think there is potential for those if you have something to show off visually. If you have a hook, you can carve out a niche on the likes of TikTok and Instagram, even if it's not what might be referred to as a more sexy subject. So one example that I really like is Miss Excel, who has millions of followers on TikTok through her expertise in Microsoft Excel. And you wouldn't typically think of spreadsheet software as something to get you an audience of millions, but she's able to do so in a way that is really insightful, helpful for the audience, and has enabled her to carve out a career. So yeah, it can appeal to a younger but also fresher audience. So sometimes that youth, I think, is accentuated too much. People on both TikTok and more so Instagram tend to be kind of wide in terms of the demographic, just because so many people are on there. But if you want to have a leadership presence, it is a case of thinking what you may be able to provide to the audience if your audience is on there, and if that's something that you think will appeal. Facebook, yeah, called it the antiquated network because it's not one I would recommend being on if you're an executive in 2024. It still has over 2 billion global users, which is quite amazing. But content-wise, it has, I think, definitely declined in terms of the quality. I think in terms of the amount of use, I think Meta themselves have lessened the emphasis on it compared to other platforms. And from a leadership perspective, I think you'll find people are more likely to be in the ones that we've referenced previously than on Facebook. And also to mention, not social platforms per se, but YouTube and podcasts. We'll talk a bit more about content shortly, but they can be great dual platforms for building audience and influence. I say dual because often nowadays, such as the example of Stephen Bartlett on the right, people producing podcasts will then film those, stream those, put those on YouTube elsewhere. Um, but I think podcasts, YouTube is all very much overpopulated as well. I think especially in the past few years, then the amount of podcasts has flourished to the extent that it can be overwhelming for people to find. And it's also a case of then people have subscribed, they follow things. So if you want to succeed with that, I think you need to build a strong case and be willing to put in the effort and resource required to do so. So it's not something to do without consideration. And then the same would go for these platforms as well. So interrelated, of course, but the first I mentioned here is a website. So having a personal website can be a good onwards destination, whether it's for a custom CV, presenting yourself in a way that you want to, you've got ownership over it, you can put your blog on there if you're blogging, if you're writing about things. I would ask about this, is the expense and time required worth it? So really think about how you're representing yourself. LinkedIn itself with the profile can be a good shop window for who you are and what you do professionally. Um, it's limited in terms of the customization. compared to a website, but also doesn't cost you as much money. You can do a decent website using the likes of WordPress.com, Squarespace, other alternatives for low free three figures annually, I would say. But it's again kind of time resource issue. And then in terms of blogging and newsletters, I say newsletters in particular, I've always been a big fan of them since my early days at the Herald and STV, just for being in somebody's inbox. They can choose whether to click through if you provide something of value. And recently, Substack has helped revitalize the kind of ecosystem. Uh, they've very simply provided that paid subscription freemium model. So if you don't know, freemium is a type of model that offers basic features of a product or service for free, and then charges a premium for supplemental or advanced features. So some of the newsletters I subscribe to have the free regular edition and then specialized editions that you subscribe to if you put in £5 per month or some sort of similar figure. Myself, I publish to Foresight, which is my newsletter with insights about digital communications. I freely, because I'm looking to build an audience, found it of use. There's also still the likes of Medium, which are popular for blogging as well, and is free to sign up to. With blogging newsletters, then there's that question about do you have something to say to find an audience, but also do you have enough regularity to talk about it? People will expect a certain frequency, whether if you want to do that weekly, fortnightly, monthly. And will that continue to be something that people want in their inbox? So it's a case of taking the time to build and maintain that and whether you want to do so. And finally, in terms of digital arenas, to talk just briefly about emerging platforms. So being innovative, staying ahead feels really good. I know this firsthand. Um, but when you're considering being a platform, is the audience there to justify an investment of time? And will it be there? It's not just a present, but it's very much kind of future questions. We're just talking about with X, Twitter, compared to Threads. I think if you enjoy experimenting with new emerging platforms, then definitely go for it. But be wary of the fact that there's less certainty that the audience will be there, that they'll continue to be there. So also think about with things that you post, if there's ways of posting it elsewhere or archiving it for future use. Um, I think for personal brand and being a digital leader, I think being able to anticipate what's coming up is important. I think keeping one eye on future trends at the moment that can be voice optimization. AI is grabbing a hold of everything. VR with the new Apple Vision Pro, AR, all these things are on the horizon. So it's worth considering for things will be in a few years and how you can put yourself in the right place at the right time. Like a lot of the most influential people on certain platforms, such as Twitter, LinkedIn, took advantage in the earliest days to build up a sizable audience and then have done the right things to maintain and build that. So there is an early mover advantage, but again, it's having that not certainty, but at least feeling like a good chance that it's where things will be moving. Yeah, and once you've decided where to be, it's time to find your digital voice. And I find, it's a fascinating subject when you think about our own personalities and how that links in and interrelates. But first, I think it's good to begin with purpose. So building the digital extension of your executive presence requires care and consideration. You can think about questions like what face do you want to present? What do you hope to achieve? I think all of us, whether it's to friends, family, have different aspects of our personalities that we like to bring out. And that's no different in the professional sense. So I think it's really important to define a clear purpose which aligns with who you are. It should naturally emanate. It should feel like a part of you. It shouldn't feel like you're a whole different person. And I do think that if you feel like you're faking it, your audience will pick up upon that. And I think we've all seen examples online of people whose digital presence doesn't feel human, to put it quite bluntly. So I do think trying to do something just aligns with who you are and what you want to achieve. I've included a couple of good examples on the right-hand side of this. And yeah, purpose, I think you can do something that's very clear, concise, like a single sentence about what you do, how you bring value, and what you hope to achieve with it. And from that, I think another important thing to do is figure out your tone of voice. And you can do that. So tone of voice is something that's used with branding for companies and organizations, and I think it can be used in a personal sense as well. It can be very simple, which is looking at the values that matter to you. So you can Google tone of voice values and see plenty of examples. I've listed some on the right-hand side, but if you look to hone in on the 4 or 5 that matter to you, so keep it manageable so that it's easy to reference. Whether that's being enthusiastic, curious, confident, resourceful, it could be optimistic, generous, but referencing those to inform how you speak. So the way that I think of it is if I write something, you can just write the first draft. You can look at the 4 or 5 values that you've got for your tone of voice, and then that can help you edit and refine what it is so that by the end of it, it should feel very much aligned to other things that you've said and expressed and who you are online. And yeah, from this, you can then think about your key messaging, what you want it to convey, and how you want it to be received. So for example, like for me, in terms of what I want to convey, in an uncertain and unpredictable landscape, I'm able to help people and organizations find a digital voice. In terms of how I want it to be received, I want the audience to trust me as somebody experienced and expert enough who can work with them to guide them in the right direction. So I think it's good to have that sort of not just what you're wanting to put out there, but how you want it to be received. Now, some tips in terms of mastering your message on the content side. Certainly digitally, be concise, value your audience's time, as well as their limited attention spans. I think that's particularly pertinent in the professional sphere because people do have all the priorities across your day-to-day work life. So if they're on LinkedIn, it's not going to be for too long generally. So how do you captivate, grab their attention, drive them to something that's of interest and where you want to take them? And on that note, I think sharing insights, not just information. So always have in mind what's the takeaway, what's the value for your audience, what are they getting from this that they might not get elsewhere. Storytelling on a human level. So that can be in very small ways. It doesn't need to be bearing your soul. Um, I do like examples of people when they're talking about what they do, what they've done, the things that they've learned themselves, because we're all on a learning journey. And you know, we all have times when you don't succeed and we learn something from that. And I think it can be useful. And I think people latch on to that. So, if you can make the most of those experiences. But I think, in terms of being concise, you don't always have to do something that's kind of longer. I think being concise, this is something that I've learned. This is something I think is of value to you. This is something I haven't done or didn't do that I would like to do and you could do. And I think there's ways of approaching that. And also in terms of content, it's really important. I think I'll return to this later as well, but about sharing, commenting, engaging with others. So not being too much within your own bubble. Spending time to promote and speak to others shows a healthy ego, but also helps build your network. It puts you in the spaces where they are as well. So it kind of helps widen your audience naturally. And it lessens the pressure to always be producing original posts. So sometimes you get a bit stuck about what you have to say, whereas you can share something that somebody else has posted that you really identify with, talk about why you identify with it or why it's useful. And that can be, I think, a really nice kind of piece of whether it's a content, where, yeah, however you want to put that. Yeah, and in terms of the formatting, then tailoring your tone. So, for example, LinkedIn is more professional, Instagram more casual. Um, it's always a balance, looking to retain your own voice, adapting expression to fit into distinct platform feeds, which sounds a bit dry, but I think of it in the sense that if you're talking to your friends at the pub or at a bar versus talking to them in a church, then you still be saying the same sorts of things potentially, but you'd be adapting how you say it depending on who's around you and how you're expecting it to be received. So it's not a case of saying a different thing, it's just about how you adapt that to kind of fit into where you are at that time. Use visuals, like very definitely. Like all platforms nowadays prioritize visuals. Sometimes video more so, but images, infographics I think are really great because it can help explain complex ideas succinctly. If you have those to hand, or if you're able to do something quickly, but I do find using a good free stock image site for something that's relevant to what you're saying. If you're taking images yourself that are quite powerful, or if they're just very, relevant to what you're saying, taking your own photos can be really good as well. Video, I think, is something where it depends how comfortable you are with video and how you want to use that. We'll return to that shortly. But I think using visuals in some sort of way is key. And then also for the social platform side, then hashtags. So Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok all makes heavy use of hashtags. So does LinkedIn, not as widely used, but still are used. So think about relevant hashtags you can put at the bottom of a post to extend the reach of those to interested audiences. Don't go overboard. 3 to 5 well-chosen hashtags are usually enough without then having an option, yeah, just not being too sure which to go for. Just keep it quite concise as well. And also, if you're a bit stuck, don't be afraid to be inspired. So I think it's good practice with whatever platform you're on to follow people that you look up to, that you are inspired by. Through that, build up a list and keep it handy of good ideas, potential posts and activity. Don't be afraid to take direct inspiration, especially when it's from other sectors and spheres, and then you can tailor that into your own tone of voice and what's relevant for your audience. And yeah, look to balance professional achievements with personal insights, as we were talking about before. Just to mention, if you are more on LinkedIn, you'll see that there's been a swing, definitely in recent months, more towards personal insights and sometimes non-professional personal insights, which obviously have fine audiences in some ways, though I do wonder if it all serves the right purpose in terms of where it takes people. So I think being personal about your own challenges, about your personal life, I wouldn't say there's anything necessarily wrong with it, but do I think have that kind of wider view of what am I wanting to achieve and where am I wanting to go with this. And on that note as well, then I think another really useful thing to think about and note down is your target audience. So in business world, we talk about personas. There's one on the right-hand side, more detailed persona from a business perspective. But I think from a personal perspective, you can have a kind of very simple version at the beginning. So yeah, I'd call it like a single condensed persona. Keep it simple, 4 to 5 bullet points about what, for your target audience, what their position might be, location, goals, needs, where they spend their time, so what platforms are on. And then when you're posting something, when you're producing something, you can think about that person as your target audience. So it just helps you be a bit more specific um, about something rather than getting a bit too much flummoxed about speaking to a kind of larger audience. And as I mentioned there, you can start with a single persona and then add more as you go along. And I thought it was really useful, alongside a tone of voice and audience persona, to have those to hand, to have what I'm calling a cheat sheet, but really what it is like a one-page concise summary that talk about 6 core elements for finding your digital voice. And I think having all of these, this kind of cheat sheet, the tone of voice, audience persona, I just find it really handy for having those to reference when you're thinking, when you're posting, planning, the core elements we talk about here. And for each of these, I would just have literally 6 bullet points, purpose, colon, and then what is your purpose, as we were talking about earlier, that kind of simple statement. With purpose, why you're building a personal brand, why to keep you on track. Then the values that we spoke about earlier. So those can be the 4 or 5 to inform the tone of voice. But I also think it's important to remind yourself about the passion, and we can all lose that in our work lives about what moves, what energizes you, ensuring that you're sticking to that and not getting too distracted. What are the skills that you bring that you do better than most? USP can be really crucial in crowded places. What is it that makes you distinct? What is it about your personality combined with your skills and passion? What is it that you're expressing that sets you apart? And I think it's also important to have goals. They don't necessarily need to be numbers in terms of growing to a certain size, but can be more qualitative about what matters to you in terms of growing your network. Think about whether they're short or long term, but look to put some targets in place. And then on a regular basis, if that's maybe monthly, you can see how you're tracking progress, how you're moving towards those. And if you're not, then look to reassess. And in terms of your audience, then I really do think that this is key. And actually, earlier this week, I saw a post that I thought summed it up pretty perfectly. And that's the idea that your personal brand should be community centered. So you might assume or think more that the at the center it would be about you. But yeah, I totally agree with the post by Sarah and Nicole there about the fact that it's about the community that you're building. I think it's something that really is great. Think about so that you can kind of remove your own ego from it, and think about how to serve your audience, build a community, and then build your personal brand through that. And I think that will come across in terms of what you do. In terms of building your network, then you don't need to start from scratch, and I wouldn't recommend doing so. I think you can build outwards from your existing network and begin to broaden influence. Active engagement builds, cements, strengthens relationships. You can expand your network by making connections. So on LinkedIn, look at connecting with others who you want to be part of your audience network. Make it personal. So, on a weekly basis, I would look at potential new people to connect to that are relevant, who you want to be part of your audience. When making connect requests, you can add a note to that to make it more personal. That can help with people then accepting and want to be a part of your network because they think of you more as a person rather than just a LinkedIn profile. And then once you have connected, then it's good to like engage with their posts as well and just build up a relationship. Instagram, X, other platforms follow more and they use follows, so it might not be two-way like it is with LinkedIn. So you might follow somebody, they might not follow you back, or vice versa. So do focus on following those of interest to you. And if you want people to follow back, sometimes they just won't. But I think you can do a bit of like engagement that can encourage them. Um, in terms of who you follow, I do recommend being selective because you want to use these yourself and get used to them. So if you just select and follow loads and loads of people, you'll find a poor quality feed that you don't really enjoy yourself. And then if you're not enjoying being on there, then that can come through in the way that you use and then post to it. Really important, I think, as well, in terms of your network, is appearing on other networks. So when I talked about engaging with posts on LinkedIn, then when you do that, that can appear on the algorithm. So other people may see things that you've posted on somebody else's post, and then they may choose to follow, connect with you. You can think about where else you can appear, and that, depending on your speciality, expertise, you can reach new audiences through presenting, blogging in others' platforms, whether that's a newsletter, whether that's a conference. I think one of the most effective ways of building your network is doing it in those ways because you're basically showing off your expertise. You've got a kind of window that other people are then looking into, and then you can look to at the end provide the onward journey for them to then become part of your network. I also think the idea of a digital black book, known nowadays more as like CRM, context database, but for those most important contacts, wouldn't necessarily for your entire network, but do look to kind of keep a list of your most important contacts so that you can stay in touch, check in with them on a regular basis, try to build up that kind of value. Um, in terms of CRM, customer relationship management and related tools, there's Monday.com, which I use, there's HubSpot, there's Airtable databases. These all have personal plans available. So you can then start to build up your own contacts database, which can be really useful. Like, for example, if you're doing a newsletter, as I did recently, you can then choose to have somebody that you interview for it that you think will be of interest to your audience. You're going to have somebody guest write for it as well. Or also, you just might want to get in contact for advice. It's all about building trust and meaningful relationships. And also, in the sense of content, then It's just, yeah, you can post whatever comes into your head, but I think often the best way of doing so effectively is to plan in advance. So you can be reactive within certain kind of parameters to certain news and things that are going on, but it can be really helpful to create a mini content calendar. Through that, build that list of ideas that we spoke about earlier, inspired by others, things that you think of that you think would be useful. You can think about when those would be timely. Is there events, international days they fit into? Where's the best ways platforms going to say them? What's the right format? Um, yeah, I think just having kind of plan in place. And if you're thinking of launching a podcast, newsletter, other sort of series, then make specific plans for those in terms of the purpose, target audience, what you want your goals to be. And with all these things, then you want to be hitting high standards, of course, because it builds trust with your audience. And it just makes you feel better about what you're doing as well. So a few things just bear in mind is fact checking. So if there is a stat, if there is an opinion, it's good just to do a double check of where that's coming from, just so that you stay on the right side of not referencing anything that might be contentious or controversial in the wrong sorts of way. Staying within your comfort zone. So sometimes it's tempting to kind of speak outside of that, as a lot of people do online, and I've definitely done the same in the past. But you should look to be able to defend, expand whatever you say, have that expertise. So anything that you post, for example, on LinkedIn, if somebody queries you upon it, you can bring in extra insights, which I think is a really good way of making a positive impression. Like we said, making the most of visuals. And I think importantly, don't be afraid to delete something that hasn't performed as you expected, or if you regretted it, do edit or remove so that others don't see in future. And this is something can be referred to as digital hygiene. Um, there are tools, for example, on Twitter, now X, that you can delete posts that came after, are of a certain age, say if they're more than a year old. And this is something to consider if you use these platforms for many years and who you are now differs from that. Yeah, and I think that all kind of comes into the idea of protecting your online reputation. Public profiles being digital does come with some risk. So there are things that you can do just to look to mitigate for those. First is to audit your digital presence. So take a look at which platforms and decide upon which of them are for professional use, which are for personal. And then generally, I would ensure that your personal profiles are set to private, just so that private posts and opinions won't be found by HR, surfaced in search, and so on. Um, I think there's always a case, if you use Instagram more for your photography, for example, you might still want to keep that public, but do look at the posts that you've had on there if there's anything that might be problematic. And do, even in public profile, private profile, sorry, do remain aware that screenshotting, things like that can happen. That's not to be too paranoid about it. Generally, you will be fine, but it's always just a case of thinking about these things and where they could appear in future and looking to remove things that you might not be so happy with. So yeah, you can shut down old profiles and sites, remove old posts. Even if you've got news articles about you in the past that are on Google that you're not so happy with, there is now the option to contact them, get those removed after a certain period of time. So practice good digital hygiene. I'd say try to do that on a monthly basis. And then also preparedness. I think that's really key. So consider criticisms and other negative situations. Can you respond? And yeah, note for reference, just so that rather than just um, acting emotionally, then you can think about how you wanted to react. I do find that when facing critical comments, it's best not to react in the heat of the moment, but to be rational rather than reactive. And that can involve taking some hours or even days to respond rather than doing it in minutes. It makes a big difference. And sometimes it could be better just to say nothing at all rather than fanning the flames and giving rise, adding fuel to the fire, as it were. And yeah, some case studies where we've just got a few minutes left, so I'll go quickly through these. Yeah, I just want to take a few different examples, just contrast and compare. First, I thought it was important was this talk about the fact that some people might think personal branding as being extroverted, as being the loudest voice in the room, but not necessarily. And Satya Nadella, I think, is a great example of that, who has in recent years transformed Microsoft and made it the most valuable company in the world. He has a quieter presence, but it still fits his personality, and it means that when he speaks, he still conveys confidence, authority. You can see in terms of the post there, he, of course, because Microsoft owns LinkedIn, has a strong LinkedIn presence. A great place for him doing thought leadership in that video that you see in the middle. But he's also on Twitter X at the moment and still uses that for posting and promoting what Microsoft is doing. And the other sort of side, I don't know, actually, I don't know if it's another side, but another way of doing it certainly is being more active in terms of credibility building. And Stephen Bartlett is somebody who he has founded a social chain, appeared in Dragon's Den, recently launched Flight Fund, very visible presence. Entrepreneur, speaker, investor, author, host of the UK's #1 podcast. I describe what he's done as almost empire building in terms of using existing experience to confidently convey expertise and then using this to secure next opportunity. Digital presence provides useful insights, building up expertise. Dragonstein especially has appeared on other platforms. So yeah, he's built the audience by providing value and through that gaining value. You can see he is on, on the left-hand side of the screenshots. He's on Instagram with Prince William promoting the England football top. So a lot of credibility there. He's on TikTok. Um, and TikTok and YouTube on the right hand side, both promoting the same videos but using different formats, so tailoring it for the format that he's on. Obviously, somebody like Stephen Bartlett has a full team, so you don't need to do something to the extent and breadth of what he does. But I think there's something to be learned from that. And then finally, I think it's hard to talk about personal branding and executive leadership without talking about the Elon Musk conundrum. Um, a very singular figure who has been an inspiration to many online, but increasingly alienated others. There's been times, I think, especially when I've worked with executives, where people have sometimes wanted to adopt the sort of approach that he's taken, but it's very difficult to do so. And you can even see this now for Elon Musk has had an impact upon Tesla, upon other things that he's doing. I wouldn't say it's necessarily going well for him at the moment. So even prior to this and prior years, I would have said it's hard to do what he's done without going down in flames because you need to have significant resources and not be afraid to annoy a lot of people. And most of us don't have that luxury. So I think the lesson from that is finding balance, which I'm not sure he's doing at the moment, but regularly reassessing and trying to ensure that you make the best use of those platforms. So finally, key takeaways. So yeah, key takeaways to put into action. I've put this in numeric list. But yeah, start with commitment to regular engagement. Just practically, just look to get up and running to build into your schedule. I've put here, identify a primary professional platform, so most likely LinkedIn, but you could go for LinkedIn and another, or you could opt for something else like Instagram if you wish to. Produce and keep handy, like I said, those resources, assets, a cheat sheet of personal brand elements, basic audience persona, tone of voice guidance. Look to provide value to your audience with each post. So always have that the center of your mind, community centered. I do really like the way of putting that. Be inspired by others. Don't be afraid to experiment with different formats and approaches, as long as you're thinking about those elements that we spoke about. Make it, I think there's a lot of enjoyment to be had from that. Build a supportive network, engage and reach others. So again, about building that community. Uh, Also practicing good digital hygiene. I would start with that quite early on as well. Create and maintain separation between your public and private selves. But at the same time, like we're saying, we're trying to ensure that those aren't so separate that they feel like the same person, but just ensure that you're being protective about what matters to you and where you want to put that. And then note what works, measurement, get feedback, adapt accordingly. Don't be afraid to ask people what they think of what you're posting. Just, ensure that you can then take that and use that constructively. And like I say at the bottom, the most important thing is try to make it enjoyable. So try to get as much out as you put in. I think if you take this approach, especially around building a strong network and community, then you will get lots of learnings, insights, build good relationships. So it won't just be an investment of your time, but it should pay off across a multitude of ways. So yes, thank you very much. I'm aware it's just gone a couple minutes over time. So if you do have any questions, please do put them in the webinar chat. If you want to leave at this stage, thank you very much for attending. I've got a couple of questions here, which I'll just answer right now. And like I said, if you have anything else, do let me know. So the first question is around LinkedIn and how to improve my profile page. And I think that's a really good question. It centers around the fact that LinkedIn right now is a go-to for certainly HR, for people are trying to find out about others in professional forum. So yeah, I think the simple things to focus on includes having a concise headline summary. So with the headline summary, then looking to put in the keywords, as it were, of what you do and what value you provide. So whether that's communications, a leader, whether it's HR, whatever those things are that you have expertise in. And then if there's key companies that you work or have worked for, looking to get those in as well. So trying to keep that within 10, 15 words. I think nowadays those can be slightly longer, just to try and get in what matters. But that's often what the first thing that somebody will see alongside the profile picture. So look to have a good headshot, something that feels friendly, something that's kind of decently shot, and something that's representative of who you want to be. And then with the about section, look to list main achievements. About section, interestingly, like keywords are things that HR managers search for in terms of looking for recruitment. So you do want to list your main achievements on there, the skills and values that you take, that you can take into roles. And then for each job position, I'd look to have kind of curated list. You don't need to list every job that you've ever done, but if it's something that you think will be useful, look to have it up there with 4 to 5 bullet points. Again, emphasizing the skills experience you want to highlight and take forward. Hope that's helpful. And then another question is, should I use video? I think that depends on what you're looking to achieve, what value you're providing. If it's something you're tempted to do, if you think you can make a case for it, like I said, I think it's always about making a case. I'd recommend starting with practice videos. Coming from a broadcast kind of background, I was familiar with like seeing myself on camera for the first time and being pretty appalled uh, how I came across and not being what I expected or what I wanted it to be. But it's a learning process. Some people may be more natural on camera, but a lot of people aren't, but then learn. Um, so yeah, record yourself if you've got an idea for what you want to do. See what works, what doesn't work. There's settings that you can choose. Do you want it to feel more staged, like here? Do you want to be at your desktop? Do you want to be wandering around? Does it feel better when it's a bit more formal, when it's a bit more staged? Do you come across better when you're just walking around and speaking off the cuff? And what are you looking to provide with that? Again, in terms of format, I think being concise can be good. You may want to choose video of yourself speaking. If you're a bit more fluent, if you want to learn around editing, you can choose other videos, stock footage. But it's really, again, about finding what works and tailoring it to specific platforms. So yeah, I hope that's useful. And yeah, I don't think there's any other questions for the moment. So I'm aware we've gone a few minutes over. So thank you all so much for hanging around for a few extra minutes. Really enjoyed this session and hope you have too. If there is anything else you'd like to know about, further details, I am most definitely up for chatting about those. So like I said, Fora has just launched. We offer executive branding consultation. So if you want to get more into any of these elements for organizations, we also do digital audits, communication strategies, and a whole heap of other things. So got the website address, my email down there. As mentioned, I'll share the presentation as well as the presentation document with you afterwards. So yes, thank you all so much for your time. I hope you have a good rest of the week and hope to speak to you all again soon. Goodbye.